Hey there, Jeff Lerner here, and in this video and then a next video, so it's actually gonna be two videos, we are going to build an amortization schedule and prepayment savings calculator, which is a fancy way of saying we're gonna look at how to test different strategies for paying off a loan faster and how much money we save and how much it compresses the time frame of the loan. There's a lot of information online about telling you to pay off your loan faster if you can, particularly with real estate mortgages. But there wasn't really a good tool that I could find that actually allows you to test some of the different strategies that they talk about and basically test your own personal circumstances. In particular, even most of the strategies and most of the tools that I found existed are based around saying, oh, I'll pay an extra so many dollars per month. But some people, what if you just want to pay, let's say every holiday season, you want to pay an extra $1,000 on your mortgage, or maybe a couple times a year make additional payments. How does that impact the course of your loan? I could not find a tool that would allow you to measure that. And I did find some articles that advise those types of strategies, but there was no way to test them. So again, we're putting two videos together here. One, I'm going to actually show you how to create your own tool to measure and track prepayment strategies, and also just in general to calculate amortization and view the curve of a loan over time, which is a really useful tool. Even if you're not testing prepayment strategies, it's just a really useful tool in general for understanding money and the value of money and when you structure finance deals over time. And to understand the concepts behind it. Again, rather than going out and trying to find an existing template, I built this myself, partly because I couldn't find a tool that accounted for the various prepayment strategies, but also just because in general, I think there's a power in building something like this yourself and really making sure that you understand it. Because if you understand it, you can really use it in meaningful ways. Otherwise, it's really just almost more of a curio, more of a thing that you are glad to have. But if you just don't really understand the concepts behind it, I think it's of limited use. So this is going to be an education or an opportunity, this video, to not just build a useful tool, but to really dig deep into the concepts behind creating a tool like this and loan amortization and accelerated payment strategies and just in general understanding finance concepts as they drive real estate as an investment and other assets too. But primarily you would use something like this for real estate. So again, two videos. First video here, we're going to dive into actually creating the tool. And then in the next video, we'll actually use it to test some different strategies. So before we get into the weeds on building this tool, I will say if you're into investing, business, money, having a better life, personal development, professional development, pretty much just the wide gamut of like things that make life better and things that make life awesome, if you get good enough at them, you might really enjoy some of the different stuff I do on my channel. I invite you to subscribe. I basically have been set free in life by embracing these strategies, embracing, attention to and a desire to learn about money and relationships and marketing and entrepreneurship and even like physical, taking care of myself, just basically a life where if information plus application equals results. I'm 40 years old. I've been at this for decades now and reached a point where it was like, hey, it's time to give back. It's time to, as cheesy as that sounds, it's time to create content that helps other people along the same path because I've been really blessed. So, I appreciate if you subscribe to my channel if you're into that kind of stuff. And definitely after we go through this spreadsheet, I'd love to hear your comments about how you've used debt or in loans in the past. Have you had results with this kind of thing? Have you done real estate investing? Just any comments or questions. I love getting engagement and interaction with my subscribers. It's honestly what makes what I do really extra fun. Otherwise, it's kind of just working in a vacuum. And I look forward to your comments and questions below. Definitely subscribe. And that said, let's get into the weeds and build ourselves a spreadsheet. Okay, so on my screen here, I have amortization schedule and prepayment savings calculator. So basically what I've done, I've got one that's kind of a skeleton and I've got one that's fully formed. with all the formulas built in and tested. And what we're going to do is this is faster than just completely building it from scratch, but basically I'm going to kind of copy and paste it from sheet 1 to sheet 2. We're going to rebuild it, and I'm going to explain it as I go, so that you can, again, not only understand how to use this tool for your own purposes, but also the concepts behind it. And to kind of sum this up, basically, this is about understanding money, how money works when you buy real estate or any other asset that you pay off on a term over time, and then what you can do to adjust the long-term value or long-term cost of the loan and the asset by having a tool that can allow you to measure different prepayment strategies. So this is kind of a good opportunity to have a general real estate finance education built into the construction of a tool. I hope that you'll get a lot of value from this. So first of all, we've got up at the top just kind of our basic variables, that you're probably already pretty familiar with: purchase price, down payment, loan amount. So we can even start to fill some of these out. Let's say we're doing a $250,000 property. We're going to put 20% down. That'd be 50 grand. That would give us a $200,000 loan amount, which we would basically create a formula that says subtract the down payment from the purchase price. If you're not familiar with the basics of how to create a formula, let me show you that again. Basically, you want to hit the equal sign. It doesn't matter if you're using Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel or Apple Numbers or any spreadsheet software. Basically, you put the equal sign in, and it tells the software that there's a formula coming. And you might reference other cells, or you might use function names. You can get a list of functions actually in Google. You can get a list of functions right here under the help section. Go to function list. But this one's not even a function. This is just a real simple calculation where you put equals, and then you're going to select B1. You look at obviously the column header and the row number, and that gives you the cell number, the cell reference. B1 minus sign B2. It's the purchase price minus the down payment, and then hit enter, and it's going to calculate the loan amount for you. I like to put values in red that are the inputs. These are the values that we decide what the value is. So whether it's a deal that has certain parameters or a loan, let's say like a loan that's 6% interest and a 30-year note, those are our inputs that we would put in. I put those in red so that as we build out the whole spreadsheet, we kind of have this big elaborate, almost like a machine. We know which are the levers that we can pull on, the inputs that we control. Those are the ones in red. It makes it just easier to track once all the formulas are filled in. So again, let's say that we have a $200,000 loan amount, and we're financing it at 6% per year over 30 years. Then our payment, we would actually calculate using the payment formula, which is equals. Again, we use the equal sign to let it know that there's a formula coming. And we would do PMT, which is the function for a payment calculation. The payment rate is going to be the interest rate divided by 12, because that's an annual interest rate, but the payment periods are monthly. So in other words, what amount of the interest rate gets applied to each payment period is going to be 1/12 of the annual interest. So we divide that by 12. We would then say, how many periods are there? Well, it's a 30-year note, but there's 12 periods per year because it's paid monthly. So we would take that and multiply it times 12. And then the present value is basically saying how much is the present value of the loan, and that would be the loan amount, which is $200,000. And then the future value, we're going to pay the loan off to zero, so we would just use a zero there. And then end or beginning, I won't get too much into the details there, but basically real estate loans, you pay the interest after it's accrued. Like if you rent an apartment, your rent's due at the first of the month, and you're actually prepaying to use the apartment for a year, or for the month. You pay at the beginning of the period, whereas with a real estate loan, you pay at the end of the month. In other words, when you make a payment on the first of the month in a real estate loan, you're actually paying the interest from the previous month. With real estate loans, banks aren't allowed to collect interest before they're due. Landlords can collect rent for space before it's used, but banks can't collect interest for money until after it's accrued. So real estate loans are paid at the end of the month. That's important for calculations like this. So we force a zero, which just tells it that it's paid at the end of the month. And that tells us what our monthly payment would be. You'll notice that it's a negative number because payments are money out, not money in. So for accounting purposes, they're a negative on your cash flow statement. But just to make it easier, we'll go to the beginning of the formula right here and we'll force in a negative, a minus sign, which will actually flip the sign of the value and switch it to a positive number. Just kind of makes it easier to mentally work with. Prepayment, these are values that, again, these are going to be in red. These are inputs that we decide. So let's say we're going to pay an extra $50 every 3 months. That's what the prepayment interval is. It's how often are you going to make that payment? Again, I did not find a spreadsheet anywhere online that allowed you to account for non-monthly prepayment intervals. So that's why we're building our own. Also, like I said, just because I think it's good to build your own anyways, because you learn a lot. So then your total prepayments is basically saying over the total life of the loan, based on the prepayment interval and the prepayment amount that I chose, how much did I spend in prepayments? So for that, you would take the term of the loan times 12, but then you would divide that by the prepayment interval, and then you would multiply that times the prepayment amount. So in this case, if we're paying $50 every 3 months additional payment on the loan, over the course of 30 years, we're going to prepay, put in a total of $6,000 in prepayments. And then original loan interest versus reduced loan interest. We'll come back around to that. And original total payments versus reduced total payments. Basically, that's going to tell us once we fill in everything else, then we can essentially put in different values for prepayments. We can say, hey, what if I pay an extra $1,000 once a year? That would be a prepayment of $1,000 and a prepayment interval of 12 once every 12 months. We can look and we say, okay, what difference did that create between the original interest I was going to pay over the life of the loan and the reduced interest that I now paid because of those prepayments, and what was the savings? And the same thing on the total amounts of payments, which you might think those would always be the same numbers, but it's not actually exactly the same for reasons that we don't have to go into. That just have to do with how loan interest is calculated, but they should be pretty close unless we're dealing with really small prepayments. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked about the variables, let's actually start filling out our loan amortization table. We have to fill in periods. These are payment periods. We're not going to do this manually. I just wanted to kind of fill in the first few, but basically if you take any two numbers in sequence in a spreadsheet like this and you drag them, it'll keep the sequential count going. So we just highlight a few of these and go down, and we're filling in 360 rows here. We started on row 7, so we end on 366 because typically you're not going to finance anything for greater than 30 years. Most mortgage companies don't go beyond 30 years. I have seen 50-year notes, but frankly, they're a kind of a financial disaster. I wouldn't recommend them for really any purpose. And so yeah, we cap it at 360, and then we'll do the same thing with dates. These tools work the same way, where if you have two dates that are a month apart and you drag them, it just keeps stacking up dates. So we'll do the same thing here. So we'll be able to look and say, okay, if I bought this property on January 1st, 2021, and I just made all the payments as scheduled, it wouldn't be paid off until 2051. But if I prepay X amount every Y months, which we'll test here, what's it going to do? When am I going to pay off the loan? We'll be able to see not only how much money we save, but also how much time we save or how much time we gain. Okay, now in terms of calculating the base monthly amount, it's pretty much as simple as just saying, okay, well, whatever the payment is, that's the base monthly amount. But the way we build this spreadsheet is because we're testing different scenarios, we're actually, there could be two different base monthly amounts. And what I mean by that is, based on the original structure of the loan, the payment is $1,199.10, right? That's the base monthly amount. But if we pay the loan off faster, eventually we're going to hit a period where the base monthly payment isn't $1,199.10, it's zero because the loan is paid off. And if the loan is paid off, then there's no payment to make, right? So we have to throw in a little bit of conditional logic in this formula, and I'll show you. I'll copy it over and I'll explain how this works. So basically, we're using this introduces us to these if statements. In an if statement in a logic or in a function, it's basically saying if, and then you make a logical expression, which is like if car equals red. And that means if the car is red, right? Like let's say you got a car and it's painted red. So if parentheses car equals red, comma, and whatever comes after the comma you see here is what you want the value to be if the car is red. So if car equals red, comma, 4, comma, 2. And what that means is if the car is red, show the number 4. If the car is not red, show the number 2. In other words, if the statement was true, show the first value. If the statement was false, show the second value. So in this case, we have if E7 is greater than 0. Well, what is E7? E7, and I kind of just picked this arbitrarily. I could have picked multiple values for this purpose, but in this case, my key is what is the actual amount of interest due in that period? And we'll fill that in later and you'll see how it's calculated. But basically, if that amount is greater than 0, then use the actual payment amount as the base payment. But if that amount is 0 or less, basically if it's not greater than 0, then force a 0. Now, why would I do that? Well, basically what I'm saying is if there's no interest due, the reason there would be no interest due is because there's no loan balance because the loan is paid off. Well, if there's no loan balance and there's no interest due, that means there's no payment, which means don't put in the base payment amount as calculated here. It means just put in 0 because the loan's paid off, there's no payment due, right? And so we're going to use this same type of logic in multiple cells throughout the spreadsheet to say, listen, if there's a loan to pay, use this amount. But if the loan is paid off, force a 0 because the loan's paid off. So that's basically what this formula here means. And so we would then just grab that. And for most of these, we'll be able to grab it and just drag it through all the cells in the column. There will be at least one exception to that, which I'll explain when the time comes. But that's how we calculate our base monthly payment amount. And so you can see over here, we're going to be calculating an adjusted monthly payment amount, which is basically saying, okay, what's the base monthly payment plus any prepayments if there's a prepayment in that month based on the prepayment interval and the prepayment amount that we determined that we're testing, right? But to calculate the adjusted monthly payment, you have to have the base monthly payment, and that's why we fill that in. And let's actually go ahead and fill these two in just so that it'll activate these numbers. Because again, this one's going to be forced to 0 unless there's a positive value in the actual interest payment. So let's fill in the interest payments. Okay. First of all, the fixed interest payment. And when I say fixed interest payment, what I don't mean is that the amount of the payment that goes to interest is the same every month. That's not what I mean. It's not a fixed amount that goes to interest. What it means is it's a fixed payment. In other words, when the original loan, as it was laid out by the bank, was for, in this case, $200,000 at 6% for 30 years with a fixed monthly payment. Based on that fixed monthly payment, in any given period, how much is going to interest? That's what this field is calculating. So again, I've already worked out this formula. We'll copy it right here. But basically what this is we're putting in, and again, we're forcing, I think I showed you this. Yeah, I showed you this up here where you force the negative at the beginning of the formula so that it flips it to be a positive number. Just makes the math easier. But basically, we're forcing a negative, and then we're using the IPMT function, which is interest payment. And for that function, then we use the open parentheses to say, okay, we're going to put in the values or the variables for this calculation. And the first one is D1 divided by 12. Well, that's basic, and it highlights for you what the value is, what the variable is. This is the interest rate, right? What's the rate that we're using as the basis for calculating interest? And it's basically saying, okay, at a 6% annual interest rate, divide that by 12. The same thing we did in the payment field, so that we get the effective rate of interest per month. And you may be going, well, some months have 28 days and some months have 30 and 31 days. But for bank purposes, most loans are calculated on the basis that every year has 12 equal sized months. They don't treat the months differently. It's kind of a little quirk of accounting. In fact, they actually use a 360-day accrual basis for most interest, daily compound interest loans. So they actually act like the year has 12 30-day months in it as an aside. But you don't have to worry about splitting hairs between 30-day months and 31-day months. You just divide the interest rate by 12. And then in the next variable, they want to know the period. So this is the first period, right? And that's why we numbered these in sequence. And then the next one, they want to know, well, how many payment periods are there? So we actually take the term and we multiply it times 12, just like we did with the payment. And then the present value, we actually use the loan amount on the day of origination. And as we'll see when we calculate actual interest, if you're calculating the interest payment based on an original payment schedule of fixed payments, you can use the original loan amount as the present value all the way through. But when you come over to actually calculating actual interest payments based on making additional payments at non-monthly intervals, then you have to actually use the current loan balance for your calculation, not the original loan amount. Which what I just said will make more sense here in a minute. But for now, we're using the original loan amount as the present value. And then again, we force zeros for the future value and the end condition. And then we can, actually one other thing I'll show you before we copy and drag or copy and paste this formula is, you notice how for the D1, I have this $sign put in before the 1. Well, basically what that's doing is it's locking the row variable for that value. So if I didn't do that, if I just had D1 in this formula, and then I copied this formula and pasted it down a cell, what it actually just did, and you'll notice D1 just changed to D2. Because if you don't lock the values, then when you copy and paste a cell from either down or over, any source cells also move down or over accordingly, right? So you have to lock the original source cell in the formula before you copy and paste it if you don't want it to jump around. So that's why we need to lock the 1 so that as we copy and paste this down, it stays at D1. And you'll notice D2, same thing, right? The term is 30 years. In every one of these rows, the term is always going to be 30 years or whatever the term is set for. We could change it to 20 years, but whatever it is, it's going to be the same in every row. So we don't want that to move. But then, for example, this A7 variable, where it's looking at the cell that's the period number, that every time we paste it down a row, we do want it to change. So we don't put the $sign in front of the 7. And as we'll see, when I copy and paste this down, you'll notice here, it's not A7, it's A10. Because as I copied and pasted, that moved down. But the D1 variable, the D1 value stayed the same because I locked the row number. Hopefully that makes sense for you. Okay, so then we can just grab this, and as you see, grab and drag. Paste it all the way down. And you can see that in the first, based on the original loan schedule, in the first month of our basically $1,200 payment, $1,000 of that went to interest. And this is the nature of loan amortization, is that over the course of the loan, a greater percentage of each payment goes to principal and a smaller percentage of each payment goes to interest, that by the end of the loan, we were only paying $6, $12, $18 of the payment was going to interest. You'll also notice that at the beginning of the loan, the amount of interest, the amount that the interest payment drops each month is only $1. Then after 4 months, it drops by $1.01. Then it drops by $1.02. A few months later, it drops by $1.03. So that each month, the amount that goes to interest, in other words, the pace at which that amount is changing, increases until you get to the end of the loan where it's decreasing by $5 or $6 per month. Again, it's just, these are curves. And you graph the interest curve, you graph the principal payment curve, and the amount that goes to principal is very small when you start out on a fixed principal payment. Let's fill in this value. It's $199, and we'll look at that formula real quick. Basically, it's It's virtually identical to the interest payment. The only difference is we use the principal payment calculation function rather than the IPMT, which was interest payment. Otherwise, everything else is the same. The interest rate is the same. The payment period is the same. The term is the same. The present value is the same. The future value is the same. And the payment type is the same. So we will drag this down. And as you saw, when you started, your first payment, only $199 went towards the principal, but by the end, almost the entire payment goes toward principal. And, if you're looking at this going, I don't really care, I don't like math. Here's the thing. I don't really love this stuff. I don't know, I actually think math is pretty cool. But what I love is what this stuff does for my life. I like... when you get really good at turning business, finance, and math, having a mental translator that's constantly translating these principles into how they play out in your real life, like retiring 30 years earlier, or spending more time with your kids, or getting to take vacations, or owning properties that pay you passive cash flow, or whenever you're converting them into the real life application of it, this stuff starts to get really interesting. I know a lot of people, they kind of glaze over at this stuff. And I don't care. I'm not like here to advocate for math. Like math doesn't have feelings. We're not going to hurt math's feelings, but we are going to hurt our own life by refusing to accept the importance of this stuff. Life isn't always just about what you like and how you feel. It's about what's important, and this stuff's important. And that's why, frankly, why I'm taking the time to make a video about it. I'm trying to share with people some concepts that can really, frankly, change your life like they've changed mine. Okay, so now let's look at the actual interest payment, because fixed interest payment, that was based on if we just paid the loan off as it was designed over time. But the actual interest payment says, well, what if I make an additional payment in a given month? Well, that actually reduces the loan balance. And since interest every month is computed based on the previous month's loan balance, if I make an additional payment and I reduce the loan balance, it actually changes the amount of interest that's due in the next month. And again, this was, I hadn't found templates that allowed you to fully calculate this in terms of different strategies for prepayments. So that's why we're building it ourselves. But to actually calculate the simple loan interest is pretty easy. Basically what we're going to do, you'll notice that over here there's a loan balance column where every period we're calculating the current loan balance. So the actual interest payment is really simple. It's just the interest rate, which is the yearly interest rate divided by 12 times the current loan balance. So basically every period we want that formula. We don't lock the loan balance because we want it to be looking at, you'll notice that, so in period 4, row 10, it's looking at the loan balance from row 9 in period 3. So it's saying, okay, take the ending loan balance from the previous period and calculate this month's interest. And we've got a lot of zeros right now because we don't have the loan balance filled in, which we'll show you here in a minute. But as we start to fill in the loan balance, then the actual interest payment due will update based on, again, the interest rate in effect times the loan balance. And ditto for the actual principal payment. That's basically just going to be saying, okay, let's take our monthly payment that we made and subtract the actual amount of it that went to interest, and that'll tell us the rest of it went to principal, right? So for that, we can basically just say, okay, take the base monthly payment and subtract from it the actual interest payment, the amount that actually went to interest, not the amount that would have gone to interest if we hadn't made additional payments, but the amount that actually went to interest, and whatever's left, that's what goes to principal. That's actually how the banks do it. They apply your payment to interest first, and whatever's left, they apply to principal. So if you underpay your loan, you're still paying all your interest, you're just underpaying your principal, and usually there'll be a late fee and a penalty, and they'll blow you up about it. But at the very least, they'll still make you pay off the additional unpaid principal. They'll never short themselves on interest. They will short you on what gets applied to principal, so to speak. So, okay, and then prepayment amount, this is a little more complex formula. So what I'm going to do And the reason I say it's more complex is because of the way we structured this, as I'll show you. It's actually, the formula has changed from month to month over the course of a year. This whole thing is based on the assumption that you're not going to select a prepayment interval greater than 12. In other words, you wouldn't make an additional payment every 13 months or every 17 months. You're probably going to do it every 2 months, every 3 months, every 4 months, every 6 months, every 12 months. Guess you could do it every 9 months if you wanted, but it doesn't make sense to build a spreadsheet to account for what happens if I make an extra payment every 31 months. So we just essentially built this to be in recurring intervals up to every 12 months. And so in calculating this, and I'll probably try to be pretty succinct about this, not to bog the conversation down, but basically we'll use the 6 month as an example. So there's two aspects to this. You remember earlier when I was calculating the base monthly payment, where I talked about the conditional logic of first saying, is there any interest due? Because if not, that means the balance is paid off and we'll just slave the field to zero, right? We'll just set it to zero. But if there is, then we'll bother to do the math. Well, we do the same thing over here with the prepayment amount. We say, and actually, let me set this to, hang on a sec. Yeah, so we do that with the prepayment amount. We say, okay, if E7 is greater than zero, meaning the actual interest payment is greater than zero, meaning there's actually a loan and there's actually interest due. If so, then bother to do the math. And here I was actually going to look at the 6 month one. So then bother to do the math. And then when we do that math, it's actually another if statement that says, okay, well, if there's interest due, then do the math to say, okay, another if statement, if the prepayment interval is any number such that there is a prepayment due in month 6, which would be if we're making the prepayment every month, then we're making it in month 6. If we're making it every 2 months, then we're making it in month 6 because 6 is divisible by 2. If we're making it every 3 months, then we are making it in month 6. If we're making it every 4 months, does that mean we're making a prepayment in the 6th month? No, because we'd make it in month 4, then we'd skip month 6, we'd make it in month 8, we'd make it in month 12. So basically we're factoring whatever period it is, and we're pulling all the numerals out, and we're saying, okay, if the prepayment interval is 1, 2, 3, or 6, then I am making a payment in the 6th month. So I'm going to put this or statement in. An or statement is true if any one of the values is true, or if any one of the expressions is true. So if any of those are true, either month 1, either 1 month interval, 2 month interval, 3 month interval, or 6 month interval, then that's true, in which case go ahead and put in the prepayment amount. And if not, put in 0, or we disregard the whole thing because there was no interest due, which means the loan was already paid, and we just force the whole thing to 0 anyways. That's basically what this formula says. If you look at the month 12 one, that's actually the most complex one because it has, again, if it was every month, if it was every 2 months, if it was every 3 months, if it was every 4 months, or if it was every 6 months, or if it was every 12 months, then we have a prepayment due in month 12. And so the or statement accounts for all those intervals. But if it was every 5 months, I don't know why you'd pick 5 months, but if you did, you wouldn't have had one due in month 12, and it would default to 0 in that case. Okay, so what we do then, because over the course of 12 months, these formulas are not all the same, we can't just grab them and drag them. We have to actually copy them as a 12-month block. I guess technically this would be called a cell block, which is a little weird because that's makes me think of shows about people going to jail. But so we're going to copy, and in this case, we're copying a 5-year cell block, which really makes it sound like some kind of I feel like I'm watching Law and Order or something. Like everyone in this cell block has been sentenced to 5 years. But there, we copied the 5-year cell block 6 times, and we filled up all 30 years of rows. And so now, again, the reason these are all set to 0 right now is because we aren't actually computing any actual interest payments, because they're all set so that if the actual interest payment only if the actual interest payment is greater than 0, does it bother to do the math. Otherwise, it just forces a 0 value And so once we fill, and remember, actual interest payments aren't going to exist unless there's loan balances. So until we actually fill in this column, column J, then we won't have positive values in column E. And until we have positive values in column E, we won't have actual prepayments being calculated in column H. Aren't spreadsheets cool? I'm telling you, I think this stuff is so flipping cool. Okay, so now let's look at, actual principal payment. That's pretty easy. We can go ahead and just drag this through because it's just subtracting the base monthly, or subtracting the actual interest payment from the base monthly payment. So we'll fill that in. And then we have, did we do actual interest payment? I feel like on this one we started, but we didn't see it all the way through. So we'll just drag that. And again, this is just taking the actual effective monthly rate of interest, which is the yearly interest divided by 12, and applying it to the loan balance from the previous row, which we're going to get to here shortly and fill in. And then all of a sudden, this whole sheet's going to come alive. Adjusted monthly payment, that's actually pretty straightforward. As you can see, it's simply taking your base monthly payment. Hang on, actually, that's wrong. Hold up. Yeah, there we go. So basically what this is taking, it's doing the same analysis, saying, hey, if there's interest due, that means that we know there's a loan balance, in which case go ahead and bother to take the base monthly payment and add to it any elected prepayment, and then calculate that. And if the interest payment was not greater than 0, then just force a 0. That's what the if logic here is doing. And again, this will all come to life once we calculate the loan balances month over month. I feel like there's all this built up energy now because we have all these zeros that are going to suddenly blossom with actual numbers once we start filling in the loan balances. So loan balance, how do you calculate loan balance? Well, loan balance is pretty simple, right? It's just taking the previous month and basically saying, okay, so let's look at this. If J6, which is the previous month, minus the actual amount of principal minus the prepayment, if that is greater than or equal to 0, then bother to display the number. Bother to display an updated loan balance. Basically, it's saying if there was a previous loan balance and after you subtract the principal payment from the current month and the prepayment from the current month, in other words, after you take the previous month's loan balance and subtract from it the amount that it's going to reduce in this month, if that number is still greater than or equal to 0, then show that number. Tell us what the new loan balance is. But if it's not, in other words, if it goes into a negative number, when the loan balance is 0, the loan is over. It doesn't keep calculating. It's not like the bank then owes you money. So as soon as the number goes negative, don't even bother to calculate the number, just force it to 0. That's what this if logic is telling us. So that said, you can see as we fill in the loan balances, now all these other numbers spring to life. Actually, before we get too far on this, I want to set the prepayment to 0 so that we start by populating this with data based on the actual loan as it was originally structured, and then we will be able to test the scenarios for prepayment. And there, as we would expect, if we're not making any prepayments, the loan balance reaches 0 in the final month. You see that in the next to last month, there was $1,193.14 left on the loan. That was the actual principal payment made in the last month. Also $5.97 worth of interest. And that effectively paid off the loan. That's an amortizing loan for you, right? So, and that also kind of tells us that all of our data checks out. And because we're not making any prepayments, our actual interest payments, our actual principal payments are always lining up with what they would have been based on a fixed payment schedule. All of our prepayments are 0. All of our adjusted monthly payments are equal to our base monthly payments because we're not making any prepayments. Okay, so now before we get into testing prepayments, let's go ahead and set this up so that it'll actually calculate cumulative interest and cumulative payments, and also that number based on prepayments, so that then we have our basis to see how much money we save by making prepayments. So I'm actually just going to copy these cells here, and we'll actually look at them. So basically this is just taking D7 through D366. It's just taking the actual amount of interest from each payment that was made and tallying it all up. It's the sum of D7 all the way through D366, which is the very last payment. And the reduced loan interest is actually doing the same calculation for the actual interest payments that were made. And since we're not doing any prepayments right now, because this is set to 0, those numbers are the same. And then over here for the original total payments, or for the total payments, it's basically doing the same thing, but it's taking, for original total payments, it's saying, okay, take the payment amount based on the original loan, multiply it times the term, which is 30 years in this case, and multiply that times 12 months per year. And it's basically saying for 360 payments, that's how much you would have paid. And then the reduced total payments is saying, okay, let's look at how much we actually spent. The total adjusted monthly payments, which was the base monthly payments plus any prepayments that were right for that month, how much did we actually spend, right? And it tallies that all up and compares it to the original payment times the total term. And then from that, we see if we saved any money. So this calculation is simply going to be this minus this. This calculation is simply going to be this minus this. And so obviously, if we don't make any prepayments, then we don't spend any money on prepayments, we don't save any money on interest, and we don't save any money on payments, total payments, right? And we pay off the loan in the final month. Okay, so hopefully that shows you the construction of everything. Now, let's just sort of casually throw out some scenarios. Again, we're going to do a whole other video around using this tool to test different scenarios, but just to kind of illustrate that it works. Now, theoretically, if we have a prepayment interval of 3, what does that mean? That means that once I set a prepayment amount, it should automatically appear in month 3, month 6, month 9, and month 12. And the actual interest payment amounts, the actual principal payment amounts, the adjusted monthly payments should change in those months only. And then we should see in those months that our loan balance drops faster than in other months, right? So let's say we do a $250 payment every 3 months, and moment of truth, I hit enter, assuming I set all this up right, and boom. Everything updates. So every 3 months now, you have an additional payment of $250. So you see in those months, your adjusted monthly payment is $250 higher than the base payment in the other months. You see that now as soon as you make that first prepayment, which is in this period, that's the next month is when you actually have a lower interest payment than what was originally scheduled based on the loan payments. So by making that first $250 payment in month 3, you actually reduced your interest in month 4 by $1.25 roughly. Doesn't sound like much, but as you see, this is why Einstein said compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. Those who understand it earn it, and those who do not pay it. It is such a powerful concept, as you'll see, because that look up here. $250 every 3 months results in $30,000 in prepayments over the life of the loan, but $42,000 in interest savings, and almost that much in total payment savings over the life of the loan. And we can go down here, and again, because we've set this up with the conditional logic to start zeroing stuff out once the loan is paid off, we can see that it's all zeros after month 304, which is in May of 2046 rather than January of 2051. So we cut about 5 years off the term of our loan. So we saved $42,000 in payments, over $42,000 in interest, and knocked 5 years off the loan. And this tool makes it easy. What if we know that we get a bonus every Christmas, right? So what if every Christmas we wanted to put $1,000 in? So that would be a 12-month payment interval of $1,000. we can test that with this spreadsheet. Again, I couldn't find a spreadsheet that would allow you to test that scenario. And most of the stuff you'll find is obvious. It's like, oh, $100 every month. What does that work out to? And here we can test it all. Okay, so thanks for walking through that with me. Again, I know it was kind of thorny and tedious, but and I will share. I gotta go save this as a template and figure out how to share it. But I will share this with you so that you can play with it. You don't have to rebuild it from scratch. But again, I think it was important to understand how it was built, why it was built. Hopefully, you learned some stuff about Google Sheets and also about real estate financing. And then I encourage you to watch the next video where we're actually going to put some theories to the test about compressing our mortgage payment schedules. And again, I'll invite you to subscribe to my channel if you are interested in investing, finance, business, digital marketing. I actually did most of my career as a digital marketer, but I've gotten into a lot of real estate investing as well. To me, it's all about cash flow and leverage. I want to know that if I'm sick, and I don't actually get sick that much because I have the resources to have good nutrition and to take care of myself and to take care of my health. I actually don't get sick that much. It's not about getting paid if I'm sick. It's about getting paid if I'm well and out having fun and being with my family and traveling. And, again, it's all for me about cash flow and leverage. And that's kind of the core of my channel, but it's all in the spirit of, using money as a tool to have an amazing life. And if that sounds like something you'd be keen to learn more about, I do invite you again to subscribe to my channel. Let me know your comments below about this whole exercise. Was it miserable? Was it boring? Was it like going back to school? Is it exciting? Is it empowering? Was it instructive? What'd you learn? What'd you like? What'd you hate? I want to know all of it. I love the conversation. And again, I encourage you to watch the next video where we're going to use this tool to go test some different scenarios for paying off our loans faster. All right. Thanks for your time. I'll see you on the next video.